That don't know me, I'm Mike Rogers. I was the former president of the Eden Prairie Cemetery Association, which is why Carol's here. Interestingly enough, Carol and I met back in March of 2019 after my cousin Norm, who was on the board years ago, wrote a little article in the Eden Prairie newspaper that basically said, you know, there's a whole lot of information about the Eden Prairie Cemetery and what we called the north section that nobody really knows what the heck happened there. Well, I knew what happened there, but I wanted to find somebody that could help me find the information that I know was lost. Because unfortunately, my predecessors, in their infinite wisdom, if once you've got a gravestone in the cemetery, you don't need that stinking paperwork. So we lost a lot of stuff. So Carol, we met Carol, and she said, well, what are you looking to do? And we told her, and she said, well, I can do that. What I didn't know is how much else she could do. It's amazing. She discovered more information about that part of the cemetery than I thought was absolutely available, number one. Number two, she cataloged it all for us, everything, which is now part of the Historical Society's information. She diagrammed the entire north section of our cemetery and laid out all the gravestones in relationship to the lot that they were originally in. So, and if you ever think about that, we did actually find one that we didn't even know was there. We had to finally dig up a little bit of the dirt in order to get the dirt off the stone because it was that deep already. So we have found some interesting things. You can't imagine the usefulness of the information that she has gleaned about all the different families. But what even more important to me is that her commitment to those people that she's found the information of. We had, not this last summer, but the summer before, we had an individual come and they said, well, we're part of the Moran clan. Well, I said, where did you live? Where do you live? She says, Texas. I said, how long have you been in Texas? Our whole lives. We're trying to find our grandfather, grandfather?
Grandfather.
Yeah, yeah, whatever. One of them far back grandfathers, anyway. I told Carol that she was here. Carol said, well, I'll put together some pictures and some information for her. Well, she came with a little binder that was about that thick. Well, if you can think about that thick, you can imagine how many pieces of paper were in the darn thing. Well, Carol didn't want anything for all the work she's done, and I felt really bad about that, until she finally nudged me one day and she says, I want a stone. I said, oh, you want a stone, huh? Whose stone do you want? Whose stone did you get?
Levi Neal.
And she'll tell you about Levi, I'm quite certain, because he's her pet. So, again, without further ado, my buddy, Carol Kissner.
Give her a diamond.
Well, he stole half my speech. So I'll start before that. People always ask me, how did I get interested in being in cemeteries? Well, I happened to grow up on a farm in southwestern Minnesota that a stone cutter had lived on, and we had discarded headstones all over the farm. One day my brother and I, well, it's a farm, you have dead animals, they die, and there's bones everywhere, so we went out and we picked up bones. We hung them in a tree. Gave us something to do for the afternoon. And shortly after that, a guy came up and said, I'm a steel or a metal collector, iron collector. Can I glean it? And my dad said, sure, go ahead. He went back and he saw headstones, and he saw bones in the tree, and he was gone. How can you not
He was gone.
love headstones? Now, my brother has since buried them all, and I don't have his names on them, and I wish I did, because I'd love to go back and research them, but he didn't. That's how I got started with it. And Mike probably gave me the best gift that anybody has given me, in that I was allowed to play in his cemetery. And I did play. Now, I'm going to have to keep running back and forth, I think, but we will get through this. So that's the view from the street of what it looks like today. So if you drive down, it's on Eden Prairie Road, 8810 Eden Prairie Road. And it says, in the beginning, our screen is a little bit wonky. Literally at 4 o'clock today, this afternoon, somebody just out of the blue sent that to me.
Oh, wow.
Does that say Ella or Eliza?
Eliza. Eliza Moran died in 1908, and this was taken probably shortly thereafter.
Wow.
Isn't that just remarkable? I keep looking for these things, and then somebody just popped it up today. So some of the earliest record, we have headstones out there of these 9 people that preceded the official creation of the cemetery. And I have to think by that time, it had already been laid out into plots and so I think 1864 was a formality. This is a very uninteresting, quite frankly, list of people.
Perfect.
But this one is more interesting. So the first day I met Mike, he handed me this scrubby board, and it had all of this stuff on it, and this was the beginning of my research. There are like half a dozen or a dozen copies of it up on that table up there. If anybody wants to take it home with them, go ahead. Moran and Moran and Moran and Moran. There's four Morans in that.
Yeah.
I just noticed it.
So when the people from Texas came up and Mike called me and said, can you come down to the cemetery, they want to know where Grandpa is. So I showed him Grandpa and I said, now would you like to meet your great-grandfather? Oh, okay. So we walked with, I said, now would you like to meet your great-great-grandfather?
Wow.
And there was some information about him being an orangeman and he wanted to be buried with certain kind of blossoms when he, and I said, do you know who gave me that information? And I said, I pointed to the lady and I said, it's your mother who wrote that. And she never passed it on to her daughter.
Wow.
So this is kind of the size of the original cemetery, except I think it's littler than that. And then it grew. And then it grew. And then it grew. And it's now all available cemetery. But once it's gone, it's gone. Buy them now. So the original, you can see the gold headstone is right in front. They're the original people. Now this man was hopeful that his own family would stay with him and be buried with him because he bought no less than 24 grave sites and only 4 of them are used. His sons, one of his sons was a doctor, and Lakewood Cemetery got him. So.
Got it.
So this is why Mike wanted the cemetery charted. See the spiffy little wall going up the side? If something wasn't done, those caskets were going to be doing soapbox derby races. They were getting pretty close to being released. And so Mike wanted to leave it in the best condition possible for when it got turned over to the city and have the wall built. Well, in doing so, he knew he was going to have to lift those headstones, and that's why he wanted it charted where every headstone was. So a couple more shots of this. Wonderful. So Mike originally asked me, I have notes somewhere. What did I do with them? I don't know.
Oh, here, are they here?
No. Well, he asked me who is buried there, where are they buried, and simple things. It's like, yeah, I can, not a problem. So then, he showed up at my house.
What's that name too?
You asked for all the information.
And there's more boxes on the floor that you can't see.
Did you pull a leaf out again?
That's as big as the table would go. And it was like Christmas. I can live on this stuff. It's amazing. I feel like I didn't go through it, but I did. I mean, I know I did. So some of the stuff is, this is how the cemetery plots are laid out and the size, and then they would, as they would fill in, they'd put in, this is the Smith lot, so little Etta and Netta are in there, and then they kind of fell down in their job. And we know people are buried in there. We know 2 or 3 of them for sure, but there's another one. Ruston Mitchell is buried.
Somewhere.
He might be in this lot, he might be in a different lot. Did he get buried with his daughter or with his little daughter and sister, or his mother? Yeah. But we know he's out there, we just don't know where. And then they got a little more exotic with some of their stuff, and you can't read through that. It's just a mystery.
It was expensive.
So this is how I charted the stuff. And I put it all in a book. With lots of charts and lots of papers and lots of...
Is this a program you
This
built
is a
on your own?
PowerPoint. It's just PowerPoint.
Just PowerPoint?
So I figured I would put it into something that anybody could pretty much access.
Yeah.
It's not meant for public consumption, but it was just purely for my notes. What it is, these are babies. This guy down here got buried outside of the bounds of the cemetery. He's in the alleyway. And that is what they call them, is alleys. This indicates that I did build a family tree for the Schmeidels to figure them all out. And this is a list of all their children. So and this is a marriage line. So that's kind of, and I just got, pages and pages of these guys. Important things, no doubt.
That is quite an
Wow.
And the chart at the very top, there, Carol, where the X's are.
Thank you for asking that. That is where in the north section that plot is located.
Okay.
So as you go through, you hit that X moves for. And the left and the right names, the Baileys are on that side of them, and the O'Tooths are down on that side of them. Yeah, that gives you a little bit of reference to what's around.
Just so everybody knows that Schmeidel lot was one of the ones that had to be, all of the stones had to be moved out in order for us to build the wall and to redo that and landscape it. So I was able to use that entire lot plot to make sure that every stone got put back in its original spot. There isn't one that's out of the way. The major monument down on the lower left side was a rather interesting piece of stonework in that it had, not only was the stone there, but it had 2 foundations underneath of it, which the only thing we could think of was, from talking with stone people, is that somebody else had started to fill it in earlier on. They had put a base in, the stone was put in, and then they decided that, well, water's running the wrong way or whatever the case may be, so we'll just move up, we'll just pour another one over the top, put stone on top of that then. So it was, and that stone weighed almost 2,500 pounds. So it was not one of the easier things we did.
Yeah, they are not to scale, so.
What does the DC mean?
That's because I have a death certificate for them.
Oh, thank you.
I pulled death certificates for everybody I could. And so if they died before 1907, there are no death certificates. If they died, about 2002 is when they stopped being issued publicly. You can still get some of that information online to about 2016.
May I just mention that the cemetery records with I believe this and detailed obituaries and the actual death certificate are available online for Eden Prairie at mincollections.org and look under Eden Prairie.
Tom has done wonderful. It's really good stuff. So those are rather dense information. Relax. When they laid the stones and got everything back in, Mike called me and he said, "Carol, can you come down here right away?" Okay. He had 2 stones out of one. He said, Agnes is left. I don't know where Agnes, something's wrong with Agnes. And he'd gotten something shuffled, it was wrong. But the more fun one was, there was an extra stone left over. And it didn't have a name, it was just one of those that says father, but it had dates. And so I looked through my files and and I finally found, the guy changed his name from Edward to Edwin. And they cut a new stone and apparently they just buried it below. And so when the workers dug it up, they just didn't make note of it. So there was this extra stone hanging around. So there's 2 little boys that died the same week. But the trees that are planted there, and there are 2 of them, they were planted together as the boys had been. And they've grown together so it looks like one tree now.
That's sweet.
That picture didn't do it justice, but that is an double oak tree that I can stand on it or around it, and I couldn't, from either side, I couldn't touch my fingers on the other side.
Wow.
That is a huge oak.
So here are 2 brothers in arms that were buried together. Civil War and Desert Storm.
Wow.
And it was a request by the Fay family that he be buried with a Civil War soldier, if possible. Mike, you should tell the story. You were there.
Tyler was killed in Afghanistan, I believe it was. His mom and dad came. We were looking at property. We weren't selling any graves in this part of the cemetery at that time. Told me his story and a little bit about what was going on, and I talked with the rest of the board, and we said we were cognizant of the factor that the Ferguson family had no children, which meant that there was no lineage left for turning graves over to other family members, so the cemetery could use them as required. So we offered them to bury Tyler head to toe to James Ferguson, who was a Civil War veteran. It was absolutely amazing. He had a vault that was had a stainless steel top, which I had never seen before, that was totally painted in the Afghanistan background with all of his member mates and everything. It was a marvelous funeral. But when they buried Tyler in, I believe it was May, I had told the family that in June, James was going to get a new stone, because James's stone had been laid down. You will see the stone laying behind the one on the right. That's his wife's original stone. His wife has a new one, and James's is on the left. And James was destroyed back in the 60s. They were coming, a reenactment group out of Minnesota was coming to offer a new stone for him. They come in full period piece regalia, including their own cannon, which kind of scared me a little bit. They set up everything, ladies in full hoop skirts, the whole 9 yards. It was in black hoop skirts. It was a hot day, I remember. They set up their cannon. I said, you can shoot the cannon off for Tyler, but I said you were also going to fire a salute for James, or for Tyler. James and Tyler both. The gun was set off over to the right of the upper lettering there, and it was face down the hill into that low spot where the house is down there. Well, they didn't have a shot in it; they just had gunpowder. But what was really remarkable was that they went to fire the shot for James, and it wouldn't fire. And now I'm thinking, okay, what's gonna happen next? I've got people all over, they're gonna blow the cannon up, kill everybody, and I'm gonna... Well, it turned out that they have a step-by-step procedure about exactly what has to happen, and it is a total time procedure, and they follow it to the letter. They relight, doesn't happen, they rejam, all the things that they do. Finally, they got the cannon to fire. That cannon fired down through that low spot and it echoed. It just reverberated down through there, and I was like amazed. I mean, the hair in the back of my neck stood up just from that. They reloaded for Tyler. They fired Tyler's shot and it went the first time. But it didn't echo. To this day, that made my hair stand up even higher. So that's the Ferguson Fay legend.
Wow. And how long ago was that?
Oh, jeez. Now you're gonna ask me dates.
Just a
That's
few-
not.
10 years?
Oh yeah, it's been at least 8 years or whatever. Shortly thereafter, Tyler's mom had a stroke, and we were so glad that we were able to do that for the family beforehand.
I'm sure they appreciate it.
So, okay, Carol, get going.
So now we come to Comstock, and this is where, what do you see there? You see grass. Do you see any headstones? No. So you assume there's nobody there. And my friend said, dig deeper, look again. So I started with census records, and I went to historic newspapers. In the meantime, I laid out the chart, pretty much empty. So you start collecting information that's online, and it's interesting because it turns out you build a family tree and you find out, well, in the top row, there's Exania and Stephen and Rouse, and they're buried in the cemetery. I didn't know they were related. And then you go down to their son Edgar, who was a Civil War vet, and he died in service. And he left his widow with 2 small children. And the point of this story is this guy, Frederick, and he suicided. And I found the paper, and it said he was buried in the Eden Prairie Cemetery, and that's how we knew someone was there. Now, it just occurred to me today when I was reviewing all of this, we don't know where his mother is, and it's possible that she's there. But boy, I've been not able to find information on it. But in the meantime, where's Mama? And when we're here, kid suicided, and her other son, her younger son, bought the lot and saw to the funeral. Well, she married Fred the farmer, who probably wasn't a very satisfactory husband, because she started messing around with a hired man. They moved out of state, or outstate, Minnesota, out to, I forget the name of it.
Lurid.
Lurid. You wouldn't believe the news. You think our social media is bad today? Holy smokes! And this is public in the paper. Yeah. So, Albert, she married Sam. Fred divorced her. She married Sam, and they were married for the rest of their lives. And Sam Geisler had Geyser had children of his own, quite a few of them, and she raised his children. So she was not a bad egg. She was just married a bad guy the first time. Oh, I keep hitting the wrong button. Don't do that. Okay, so Albert moved to California, and he's got several children and descendants, and this brings up the grave issues of the whole point of this is what becomes of those unoccupied spaces? Which one is occupied? You can't find them with these, 1879, you didn't bury people in metal caskets. You had wood caskets, they dissolve. So you can't use metal detectors. So I tried, I snuck out to the cemetery, and I was quiet. I made sure no one was around, and I got out my witching rods. And who should drive up but Mike? Why are you doing? I was a failure at finding graves anyway that way, but bodies. But I do have a friend that could do that, and he uninterred several people when the St. Cloud freeway went through. They relocated a cemetery, and they unburied the people that they knew about, but then Bob went out there and he found several more bodies, so it apparently works.
Would a cadaver dog be of any
No.
use
Not
this
that
age?
long ago.
Not after that long.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ground penetrating radar only shows you discrepancies in the soil surfaces. Doesn't really show you anything like a grade box or anything like that. So,
It would show disturbed soil.
it shows disturbed soil, but the problem is that you don't know why it was disturbed and how much of it. You know, so.
Carol, what are witching? What are witches?
Ooh,
You had to ask.
What are they?
people use willow branches would work, but when you walk and you cross water or pipes or something, they'll dip. In my case, I have grazing rods, and they're an L shape, and they will cross. And I can find my water pipes at home, but not cemetery stuff. So, who has the rights to these unused spaces now? And that's kind of, you know, there's a limited amount of cemetery space in Eden Prairie, and the cemetery has the right to reclaim them after 60 years.
60?
60. If they are, if there's no interchange between the family and the cemetery, if everybody just walks away and forgets about it. So Albert moved to California, and I don't think they even probably know where Minnesota is, his descendants. And would they want to come back here and be buried just because it's free space? And I was like, and if you sell back to the family, you sell back at the price at which they paid, which back then was $5 probably for an 8-pack. For 8 grapes, yeah. So that's kind of the issue of the moment, is what happens to these unused spaces, and that's what we're researching. So now I come to Levi Neal. It's charming, the stones are beautiful, but Levi was missing the top half of his, and the name was not there. Well, so you start looking at what is his name. You look at census records, you find out. And he was a Civil War soldier who died during the Civil War, and he died in Mankato. And it starts, why did he die in Mankato? Well, he was in the Indian Wars. Yeah. And I looked and I searched and I found, drove down to Mankato, and nobody knows. And I just did a random, put in Levi Neal on Google, and up pops Kurt Brown. And he had written an article about him several years ago. So I contacted Kurt and I said, you know, why did he, you know, what's going on? Well, he died from measles that he picked up at Snelling. He went to Granite Falls. He and his brother both they were together. And they got orders to ride to Mankato. Well, there's several Indian villages along the way. And there are a disaster. You know, so many Indians died from that exposure. When he got to Mankato, a chaplain wrote about his death, and he's in a letter to his wife, and that got saved. And let's see, did I put that in here? Well, so I hit the paper, man. There's my 15 minutes of fame. So there's Levi's, and that's the day we laid in his new stone.
Oh, cool.
Oh. And they straightened Mom and Dad. And we got to keep, Mike allowed us to keep the old stone behind it. They don't always allow, cemeteries don't always allow the old stone to be kept. If you're going to get a new one, you out with the old one. But We got to keep that for historical purposes. And so he has a name now, and this chaplain had written that his mother was going to be devastated by his death, just Levi's death. So it's like, it got to be personal for me.
Is that what Neil Lake Road is named after?
Yes.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah, the Neal family was owned property at the cemetery. We have the Neals for Neal Lake, we have the Andersons for Anderson Lakes, and we got the Starrings for Starring Lakes, all in the cemetery.
So this young man is from California, and he went out to honor his grandfather with flags and noticed that not many other veterans were getting flags. And so he has made a project of going around to one cemetery in every state of the union and planting flags. And see, he picked ours, and they didn't give us a lot of time to organize media, social TV or newspaper coverage, but the police were there, you know, in case we got rowdy.
It has happened, cemetery.
And a little more history, but some more names. Pemberson, Niels, La Riviere. Reading through those old things were pretty interesting. There's more information. I think they're, you know. There's too many Severin Petersons, by the way. You need a new name. So there's some of the more interesting things in the notes where lots were $5 in 1898. Yep, poison the gophers. And the women better provide a good dinner.
Mac and cheese, right?
So that kind of concludes my babble. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Or if you have some later, let me know.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
That's it. Good. And Mike assures me there's more to come. He just said he's got a heated garage and we're gonna go through those records again.
When the cemetery was turned over for management to the city of Eden Prairie on the 1st of April or 1st of March this year, I turned over all the burial records for the cemetery. Each grave within that cemetery has its own file folder within 3 fireproof file cabinets. They were not real happy when they had to come and move them, but it was real nice to them. They were all on 4-wheel dollies and strapped to them before they took them, so they didn't have to worry, because each of those file cabinets is about 1,200 pounds. But I did keep the one because I kept every piece of historical data that is there, because I didn't know if it belonged to the city of Eden Prairie, to the Eden Prairie Cemetery, or the Eden Prairie Historical Society. And I still haven't had a chance to even open that question up to anybody, but that's what we will be figuring out. The other thing Carol and I have been kind of toying around with is that, you know, what sort of information can we put together for a long-term project for the cemetery that will be there forever. And but we're going to start looking at that sort of stuff. I have every meeting agenda, or not meeting agenda, all the notes from every meeting, yearly meeting of the cemetery since 1897.
Poison the gophers.
Poison the gophers. Women to fix a good dinner. Yeah, but it's you know, all of those sort of things, and all the things that have happened since I've had the pleasure of managing it for the last little over 20 years. And so we've done a lot of things at the cemetery to make it a whole lot better. But like I said, as in all of us, we come to the point in time where we can no longer manage doing everything we care to in our lives, and you need to get rid of something, and this was the one I had to get rid of. So,
Question,
yeah.
with regard to the